Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen. Now, we have talked many times about what a cashless society could be. Basically, we're talking centrally planned cashless, which means the banks would basically own us. All the money that we put in a bank is not ours, it's a bank's. And when all money that we have goes through the bank, then we're never free. The bank always owns our money, and our privacy is incredibly infringed. Now, we talked recently about how at the World Economic Forum in Davos, they were talking a lot about creating a cashless society. We've talked about how M0 is on a downtrend like we've never seen before. M0 is cash and coin in circulation. And now something that is brand new to this story is that the Center for International Governance has urged the G20 to set up a central bank blockchain consortium. So basically they want to be able to centrally plan this great idea of blockchain technology, this idea of what we have here in our Bitcoin accounts. Instead of this uncontrollable asset, instead it's going to become this controlled asset in which they can control our every move, our every financial move, and they can track all of it. And this is a huge infringement of civil liberties and a huge risk as the next step up in the globalist agenda, as J. Edgar Griffin told us not that long ago, is that they can use this in order to get that one step up above fiat currency, which is enslaving us all in debt. So John, can you go into this?
Okay, so first of all, the whole story is that, of course, the Center for International Governance Innovation has urged the G20 to actually set up a consortium. We had the consortium that we talked about before, the R3 consortium that have the major banks, that's their private ledger and so on. CIGI, as they're called, they want to be able to have all these central banks cooperate to create, as they say, an electronic fiat currency. So there you go, like that, right in that name, they're telling you it's going to be a centrally planned electronic currency. Now, of course, the G20 includes some heavy hitters like China, Germany, England, and the US Fed that has already put on, trails to work with, setting up their own, national electronic currencies using the blockchain technology, which is, of course, the technology that Bitcoin is based on. But of course, the Bitcoin is decentralized versus the centralized move that they want to do with their blockchain type of currencies. Now, of course, I've been lately, going through a book called The Curse of Cash, and Josh is, of course, shaking his head. He doesn't understand why I want to read this piece of crap. But
well, you got to know your enemies. I understand.
Yeah, exactly. And
read this little piece by Ben Bernanke at the top.
Well, this one could be misconstrued because when you actually listen to this without knowing the context of the book, it actually sounds pretty good. But a fascinating and important book. Kenneth Rogoff sets out a compelling and wide-ranging argument for weaning our economies off paper money. Well, it sounded pretty good, but then, of course, it's The Curse of Cash, the book's name, so then
shit smeared on the cover.
Yeah. So it's quite dangerous. Now, in the book, of course, they go through a whole array of different numbers, and I'll just mention some of them because I think it would be interesting for us to understand where we are in this move to, towards this cashless society. Mm-hmm. Now, currency to GDP ratio, for example, just shows how much currency is in existence. In actually, when they talk about currency, they talk about the M0, the coin, and cash in circulation. Now, Norway, for example, which is my country, are the lowest. They have 1.45% currency in circulation versus the GDP that they have. And of course, Sweden, that we talk about a lot, which is way further ahead than Norway, has 1.8%. Now, it might be misconstrued because Norway, of course, has oil. So that's the reason why they're so low. And of course, they have Nigeria on top there as well. And then, of course, you have Argentina, New Zealand, Denmark. And then at the higher level, where you have more currency, it's actually Japan has 18.6%. Currency versus their GDP, which they have had such a massive inflation with the just blatant printing and buying stocks by the Bank of Japan.
Mm-hmm. Now, all by design.
Of course it is. There's other numbers, share of largest banknotes, which is quite interesting. So they're talking about, the two highest denominations of banknotes that you might have. And the recent numbers that Kenneth Rogas pulled out here is, of course, 96.6% of all the currency in circulation, like the coin and cash in circulation in Switzerland, which is the highest, is actually the highest denomination coins. Chile is on the bottom with 31.9. Norway is quite high as well, 94.1%. So think about if they actually suddenly ban, the higher denomination notes, which he's talking about. That's what we need to do, he says. And of course, India follow this blueprint. This is the blueprint that they're following in order to implement the cashless society.
Yeah, India has gone 86. It has taken 86% of their cash and coin in circulation out of circulation. But John, can you tell us what conclusion this leads us to?
Yeah, well, the conclusion, of course, like he talks about in his book, how of course it is to stop these criminal people and everybody that are the black market, as they called it in India.
Free black market.
Well, like this is just a textbook. So what is happening in India is what they want to do everywhere else. So make no mistakes, like they're gonna do it. But he says in the book that they need to use the slow incremental wave of it. And of course they've been doing that, like they're about 10 years into this, like the thought.
Yeah,
so they've been slowly, like trickling in and, putting in these policies slowly, but surely. And he says that's the only way we can do it, because if we did it in an instant, people will lose faith in the central planned economy, and then of course it will fail. Like Kenneth Rogas said himself in this book. And he, of course, talks about, probably he doesn't really want to mention it that much, but he talks about tax evasion. And that's the number one thing that, of course, these bankers want. They want to, the central planner wants to, be able to collect taxes, and they don't want you to have any privacy whatsoever. Of course, they say, oh, don't worry, you need privacy. It's so important. Of course, he goes into some of the, the things that are might not be so good with a cashless society. It talks about how it would disenfranchise the poorest people, which usually most people are actually using cash in order to do transactions because they don't have bank accounts.
Yeah, sure.
And he said, of course, well, that's no problem, because the government will supply them with free debit bank accounts. So we get them into the banking system to make all them slaves, because now they're actually somewhat free compared to a lot of the middle class.
So now they have the mark of the beast, and now they're all being watched and surveilled, and that's great, free.
And then
of
course he talks about disease. It's one of the it travels with currency as well. And then he talks about something very interesting, which he didn't elaborate a lot on at all. He said, the importance of, an emergency situation where you have a blackout, for example. And he said, there's no problem, because all these cell phone towers have, of course, generators and so on. So there's no problem whatsoever, really. He just kind of shoves it out of the way without actually going deep into it. I can tell you, with the cashless society, if you had this, and I know the whole system that it runs behind, because I built cell phone towers myself, so I kind of know and understand a little bit. Yeah, they have a limited amount of power to be up for a certain amount of time, and then they hope to be refueled or whatever if you have outages. Now, let's say that you, for example, have a solar flare. He didn't really mention that, like an EMP from the sun. That has fried, back in the 1800s, it fried telegraph stations and blew them up.
Back in the early 20th century in San Francisco, a whole telegraph office exploded, and it was famously recorded.
Yeah, and of course here in Canada, there was an outage for a substantial period of time because of these solar flares. So it's a lot of threats that he doesn't really like. He kind of shoves it under the carpet, especially the electronic side of it, that everything is online and needs power in order to to actually be up and for us to transact. So let's say that we had this power outage or this massive natural disaster.
Yeah.
How are we going to trade with each other? How are we going to be able to afford things? And he said, he kind of just pushed it to the side. Well, what it comes back to, and he goes through it of course, with the implementation and everything, especially taking away the notes and so on. And he says we need to save the monetary system, the fiat paper currency system, by the way of implementing this cashless society. Then you go to negative interest rates. He's of course talking. There's 3 chapters in here talking about negative interest rates and different approaches that they could take to it. I found it also interesting in his book. Just amazes me a lot of things. He talks about, for example, for tax evasion, they have VAT tax evasion. He says a lot because of cash use. They can be able to not pay the VAT that they owe the businesses and so on. He said, well, in Portugal it's so fantastic because they have a lottery. So they lure people in with a lottery. That the more receipts that you give them, that with cash receipts that shows that you actually paid the VAT. Then you get, an entry into the lottery, and that actually increased by far the contribution. So willingly, going in and showing how much money they spent.
But you might win. Just cross your fingers. You might win. No, that's absolutely insane. And of course, that puts a new, it creates a new definition for the stupid tax, as many people call the lottery, which is just people voluntarily giving the government money because they might win a lottery. Well, these people are literally giving up their tax money for a chance to win.
Yeah. No, and another thing too that they talk about in this book that I'll briefly talk upon, and we might do actually a video right on this topic, which is seigniorage. I don't know if anybody of you are familiar. There might be some smart individuals that are really read into a lot of how central banks works and that the government makes money. Now, seigniorage is basically the money that the government makes when they print money out of thin air. So, for example, I have a chart in front of me here that shows the seigniorage revenue that different countries are making off of their money that they print out of thin air. So I'll tell you a couple of countries. For example, Canada makes 0.18% of the money that they print. They actually make that as a profit back to the government, and of course, the mint that prints that money. And here in Canada, it's a private company called Giske Endeavour that creates the paper the polymer notes that we currently have. So that's Canada. Norway has very low income, 0.02% revenue to the GDP, which is still high. We got to remember, this is a part of the GDP. So if you actually calculate the numbers that they make off of printing this money, we have Russia is on top with 1.37% of their whole GDP is made up of printing money and then supplying it to the market. We got the United States, which interestingly enough is around 0.40%. Then I want to just make one example, which is the $100 bill in the United States. Now, it actually cost the Federal Reserve 12.3 cents to make that $100 bill. The rest is profit. Where does that profit go? Well, of course, it goes back to the government. Now, they profited on making that money, and then, of course, now it's inflation because there's more money in supply in the system. So they actually make money to make more inflation. And then they destroy our purchasing power, and they make money themselves.
It would help if they put that towards the debt that they're accumulating by printing that currency.
It's insane. And now, of course, at the end, he's talking about the internationalization of money and so on. He doesn't really talk directly about the IMF.
Well, yeah, actually, I wanted to quickly go into that because we mentioned the Center for International Governance at the very beginning and how they're urging the G20 countries to push this cashless society. And it's interesting that it is a Center for International Governance. Now, that leads us to the fact that the special drawing rights, the SDR currency being pushed by the UN, the global currency, that they're trying to implement that cashless society within the SDR basket. So can you kind of go into how this can become a globalist issue and how it very likely will become a globalist issue?
Yeah, well, the thing is, my point of view, of course, they talk about how they are willing to, look at new technologies. And then, of course, they talked about it in the article that we showed at the start about the Center for Governance, how they are urging them to create this. When it comes to this SDR, it has all to do with, creating, this is my point of view, and I think they would be doing this because it makes sense from from their perspective, not my perspective. It makes sense to have the SDR as that blockchain currency, but we as peasants are not going to see anything of this SDR. It's going to be used between the multilateral corporation, the big corporations that are in several countries, and of course the governments when they pay and settle between each other. And then they're going to use, the cashless society, implement it into our local currencies. They're going to, make the United States dollar, the Canadian dollar, the Norwegian krona, whatever currency it is, they're going to actually be backed by the SDR. They're going to be pegged to the SDR, and of course devalued severely at the point when they are wanting to implement the cashless society. For example, Norway has come out and said 2020 is the date that they want to implement a cashless society in Norway. Now, interestingly enough, Martin Armstrong put the date of 2020 on the fully implementation of cashless societies, and he probably have read these books for sure, knowing what he knows. He's a high financier at the international level.
How many years ago did he make that prediction? Because he has a way of predicting things 20 years.
Yeah, well, when he made that one was when he came out of prison. Of course, he was in prison for making algorithms that could predict all of this stuff, and the government wasn't. He wasn't willing to give it to the government, and then of course he got sent into prison for not wanting to share that information. Now, he made this back, I believe, not too long ago. He made it because in 2015-16, he believed that, it would be a complete collapse of the economy. Now, the thing is, he was right because it was happening, but it was, manipulated.
But he followed fundamentals like we so often talk about. We shouldn't follow fundamentals because it's too manipulated.
Yeah. So at that time, he said, well, listen, I've done my research now. I see that they want to implement cashless societies by 2020. So just wait and see. Like, this is going to happen no matter what, Donald Trump is trying to say or do.
There's nothing he can do.
No, there's nothing he can do. There's an elite. There's the financial elite that's all working together. The U.S. Treasury is completely separate from, the president, really, when it comes to its powers. And
I'm sure good old Mnuchin will be totally against some kind of globalist central planning.
He'll use the Exchange Stabilization Fund to manipulate whatever he can until, the dollar will go bust. Together with the rest of the global fiat currency system, then the problem is the replacement is this new system, which is a cashless society, where you lose all of your privacy, all of your rights, and of course, as they say in the book, it would be great to get some income from those tax evaders, those pesky tax evaders. Like he's kind of like saying in the book that it's all about these, the black markets, these criminal people that we're going to come after, but not really. Like what we really want to come after is the tax evaders, because there's in economies, the biggest socialist economies in the world have the highest amount of the black market, which is not the criminals, but the tax evasion market. They actually have one of the highest amount of people actually evading the taxes is these socialist countries, because there's so much freaking taxes. There's a reason why I left Norway. I don't want to stay in a country like that.
But you come to Canada, of all places.
It's the lesser of two evils, I guess.
Yeah, it's getting beaten once versus twice.
Yeah. It was for love, not for economic reasons.
Yeah.
So there you go. Like it was not my economic reason to land there, of course. But that's all that it is about this cashless implementation. And we are going to see it happen. But what we need to do is we need to educate people about this cashless society coming. And people need to, have assets outside of this, outside of the banking system, in Bitcoin, in cryptocurrencies that are cashless, but they're decentralized, away from, the power and control of these central governments and institutions.
And most of all, sound money like gold and silver as well, and insure themselves instead of just trying to invest. And it's worth pointing out just quickly about the black markets, just considering how prosperous parts of India were because because of black markets, and they're called black markets because they're illegal. Ooh, scary, but it's not always cartels that are behind this kind of stuff, which the government
it's people
pushes forward in the first place. But no, it's people that are just trying to exchange goods for services without taxations and regulations coming down on their head, because people are responsible and can do things for themselves without being coerced and forced and told what to do and what they can't do.
No way.
I know, right? It's crazy. People can be responsible and be adults and, sell things to feed their starving families.
Yeah.
And then these laws come in and they try and get rid of the black markets and trample on the black markets because they're so evil and bad, and all of these criminals who dare to not pay so much taxation and not, extortion, I should say. And in the end, it just actually hurts prosperity among free individuals and pushes more of the surveillance state, pushes more of the debt enslavement, and more of this global financial or monetary system, which is trampling on us every single day. And what happens when everyone is in debt? What happens when no one can buy scraps of food even for their family? Well, they become forced into servitude, and they go onto their knees, they fall to their knees and beg the government for help. And that's exactly what they want.
Yeah, they want to have that control grid, and if you don't agree with the government, they just hit delete on your bank account and you're done.
Bail-in.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked about that.
Well, not just bail-in, but
of course
they can just hit the delete button, and then you have zero money in your bank account.
Yeah, and you can't do a bank run when there's no actual physical currency.
Oh, exactly. That's another thing that I forgot to mention.
Yeah.
Is of course the fear of a bank run, and they said even if they just eliminate the bigger note denominations, they said it might be limited how much damage a bank run could do with this lower denomination coins in circulation, because they want to just. He said they might just keep them in circulation. But he's also a little bit worried that, they could still have a bank run because they're so fucking, sorry for the language, leveraged, these banks, that they, even with the smaller denomination notes, they might be screwed as well. So, yeah.
Well, what do you think is the bottom line, John, as we close up this extremely long report, as I could see?
Yeah, I know. No, the bottom line is you need to understand what they're trying to implement, and then you need to secure yourself by being outside of the banking system as much as you can. Save yourself before this whole system collapses in on itself, and they implement what they really want is this technocratic control grid of ultimate loss of privacy and freedoms.
Absolutely. We must stand up as free, voluntary individuals, liberty-minded individuals above this insane coercion, above this debt enslavement. We must be able to ensure ourselves and our family for the future in case of the inevitable economic crash, and we must just be smart and do what we can to inform ourselves and inform our friends and families. That's the best that we can do, and then hopefully we will be able to stand tall when all of this comes tumbling down and start from scratch from a free monetary system, free of any kind of bankster, central banking, central planning, coercion, or state coercion. So thank you very much, John, for going into all this with us, and we'll be back at you with much more. Check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated. And of course, check our link or our address in the description as well, and in the comments for Bitcoin, which we will also put up on the screen for you to scan if you please. So thanks again, John, and we'll be back at you with much more. This is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.